Okay, so I think I'll start. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Welcome to the Meitar Award for Excellence in Photography event. I'm happy to introduce myself. My name is Ya'ara Raz Haklai, content manager and acting chief curator at Photo Israel. I'm honored to host this evening artist Rhiannon Adam, winner of the 2020 Meitar Award, and Grzegorz Kosmala, founder and director of Blow Up Press, who was part of the Meitar Award jury at 2020. Thank you for taking your time and being with us. I also want to greet Eyal Landesman, founder and CEO of Photo Israel, that is with us this evening. Hi, Eyal. Before we start, I want to tell you about what is going to be this evening and the different parts of the event. At the first part of the event, I will talk shortly about the upcoming Photo Israel International Photography Festival and about the Meitar Award and its submission. And at the second part, artist Rhiannon Adam, winner of the 2020 Meitar Award, will talk about her winning project, Big Fence, PITCAIRN Island. The Adam won a $20,000 worth grant for publication of a professional photography book for her winning project through Blow Up Press. And the book will be launched in the upcoming festival in the upcoming November 2021. The event will continue with a talk with Grzegorz Kosmala, founder and director of Blow Up Press, which is a boutique press located in Warsaw. Greg, Rhiannon, and I will talk about the working process on Adam's book, which Greg and Rhiannon are working on for the last more than 6 months, I think almost a year now, since November, since Rhiannon was announced as the winner of the prize. If you have any questions for one of us during our talk, please write it down in the chat, and we'll be happy to answer all the questions, or at least most of them, at the last part of the evening. That will be dedicated for a Q&A session. Okay, so first of all, I want to say a few words, of course, about Photo Israel. If some of you are not familiar with our organization, Photo Israel is a non-for-profit organization established in Israel in 2012 to realize our social vision of creating a better society through the language of photography. We believe that photography is a universal language that reaches across all cultures and genders to be understood by all. It's a language that allows of building bridges between central and remote areas and between unprivileged communities and the public. We have social outreach activities throughout Israel during the whole year. And our pinnacle event of the year is the International Photography Festival, which is Israel's largest photography event. This year it will be taking place in Tel Aviv in November 2021 and for the 9th time. The festival has long since become an established and well-known cultural institution, which welcomes thousands of visitors each year. About 200 leading and emerging photographers, artists, Israeli and international, are exhibiting their works in the festival over a course of about 2 weeks. The Meitar Award for Excellence in Photography is a collaboration between Photo Israel and the Tzvi and Ofra Meitar Family Fund. It will be awarded this year for the 6th time to a photographer whose works demonstrate excellence in the field of photography. Sorry, just a second. Okay. A professional panel of judges will review the submissions and will select a photographer who demonstrates through thought, quality, originality, and excellence in photography, as well as a potential to create a comprehensive body of work suitable for solo exhibition, which is actually this year's award. The submitted portfolios will be delivered to the panel anonymously, which means with no identifying marks, and the judges will base their judgment on the quality of the photographs themselves without taking in consideration education, experience, origin, or any other element as part of the submission. So it's really the project itself that is going to be judged as part of this award. Before I continue, I want to show you this short video of the Meitar Award. So please. So the photographs that you've seen in the video clip are all part of the finalists of the 2020 and 2019 Meitar Awards. Maybe you've seen Rhiannon's works as part of the video. And the reason that all the finalists are showing is because of all the work submitted, the jury will select 20 finalists for a group exhibition. And here I want to show you, sorry, next, no, this one. For a finalist exhibition, it's a group exhibition that will take place in the International Photography Festival in November. So here we can see photos from, the 18 and the 19 exhibitions. And this one is from last year's. And actually, due to the coronavirus pandemic, the 8th International Festival that took place in Tel Aviv in last November in 2020 at Kikar Hamdina, it was displayed in a special format. And this is what we see right now, part of it, the Meitar Award exhibition. We saw the changes of the worldwide situation as an opportunity to think outside the box and to have an outdoor festival. So the whole festival was an outdoor event, so people could come, although all galleries and museums and all cultural events were canceled or delayed. Our festival took place, so it was very exciting. And because it was an outdoor festival, this festival is now traveling throughout Israel. So it was really, tried to make an advantage out of the situation. So a few more interesting and important elements regarding the Meitar Award is that the winner will be announced during the festival in November, and the award winner will receive $14,000 worth grant composed of a personal grant of $2,500 and curatorial guidance and the production of a solo exhibition that will be part of the 2020 International Photography Festival. We have a very distinguished jury this year, as each year, and this year's Meitar Award jury, I want to take this opportunity to thank them for sharing their knowledge and experience with them. And the jury members are Scott Ray, CEO of World Photography Organization, and Angus Montgomery Arts, Sigalit Landau, the Israeli fabulous artist, Daphna Meitar Nechmad, the representative of the Tzvi and Ofra Meitar Family Fund, Karin Khan Kaufman, art director and chief representative of Leica Galleries International, Avi Sabag, founder and director of Musrara, the Nagar School of Art and Society in Jerusalem, Rivka Saker, chairman of Sotheby's Israel and founder and board chair of artists, Enrico Stefanelli, founder and artistic director of Photolux Festival in Lucca, Italy, Esteban Virgavolgi, curator, photo editor, and secretary of the Kappa Grand Prize in Hungary, and Eric Worms, editor and chief editor of Goop magazine and Goop platform. So thank you very much for all of you. And now, last important issue, of course, is the schedule. So early registration will finish on July 14th. And then the late registration will continue until July 29th. Before we will get to our second part of the evening, I do want to give a few tips regarding the submission. Actually, it's not guidelines only for this specific submission, but for, I think, any submission, not only in photography, but also for different genres and medias art. And when submitting to the award, please keep in mind that you're submitting a specific project, a specific series, which means it should have one unifying theme that connects it all together. It could be a thematic theme, and it could be a visual theme, most likely to have both of them together, because we do recommend to have a unifying and distinct visual language, which means maybe the same format or a color scheme or same style, something that will unify it together, not only thematically, but also visually. Find your personal and unique angle to tell your story. Of course, as I said before, the judges will think of originality and uniqueness in your project. So I think it is important anytime in life, maybe, to find our way to tell our story in a specific way that is right for each and every one of you. And last but not least, I do recommend to give a name or title to the project. It does give some other thoughts or direction and can clarify your ideas. So like this is, I think, quite basic tips that can be generally useful. Okay, so regarding the text and the submissions, as I said before, it will be anonymously, which means the judges wouldn't be able to see your CV or anything else, but we do want a series name and a short description on the body of work. Some relevant information or a description, something that will shed some light on the project itself. Okay, so I think at this point, if you have any questions regarding the Meitar Award or the tips of the submissions, please write it on our chat. And now I want to introduce Rhiannon Adam, Meitar Award winner for 2020. Rhiannon was born in Cork in Ireland and was educated in Central St. Martin's and in the University of Cambridge. She is currently based in London. Adam's work is heavily influenced by her nomadic childhood spent at seas, sailing around the world with her parents, Sounds fabulous, Rhiannon. Her long-term projects straddle art photography with social documentary, while subject matter explores the liminal space between fact and fiction. Her first book, Dreamlands Wastelands, was released in 2014, and in October 2017, the Thumbs and Hudson published her extensive resource on instant photography, Polaroid, The Missing Manual. Her work has been exhibited internationally as well as being widely featured in the press. So, Rhiannon, please, the stage is yours. I'll stop my share.
Thank you. Thank you for that very thorough introduction. I'm just going to share my screen now for you. Let's go back to the beginning of this. Right. So that is me, as if you couldn't tell from the picture. That's actually when I was leaving at Pitcairn Island, and I look more depressed on the outside than what I was feeling on the inside, but more of that in a minute. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background, which we just touched on very briefly, but this was kind of the genesis of this whole project. So this is the boat that I grew up on. It was a very small kind of cruising yacht, and we sold our house, we sold everything that we owned, and we bought this from a pub notice board in Ireland. And I lived on this from 7 until 15. And so there's me in the middle of the deck. You can kind of see me there, and with my mum and my dad. And obviously it's quite difficult to persuade a 7-year-old to give up their life and their friends and everything that they know. So on the selling point, my dad tried to instill a sense of adventure. And so he gave me a copy of the Mutiny on the Bounty, which he got at auction. And this is a very British story, but it's a very well-known story that's been retold on the silver screen many, many times. But essentially it tells the story of a ship that was tasked to go and collect breadfruit plants from the South Seas to bring back to feed the slaves in the colonies in the Caribbean. But you know, the crew had other ideas, and they decided to kind of hide out away from British law when they stole the ship, and they burnt the Bounty on an island called Pitcairn Island. Sorry, just whenever someone comes in to admit it, it seems to stop. All right, and so this story has been really immortalized, you know, in so many ways. But one of the main things is, you know, there are many recordings that were made at the time. There are huge archives around the world that contain much information about it. There are even recently, in recent years, there's been a reality TV show which traced the story of what happened when the captain was sent overboard from this ship, which is kind of what you see here. There was even like a few years ago on British TV. So this story is kind of, for every generation it's been reinvented. But I was kind of first came into contact with the story through my dad giving me this book. And the silver screen loved this story. So you can see that in every generation, pretty much, there's been some great Hollywood heartthrob that has played the leader of the mutineers. So you have Mel Gibson and Clark Gable, Marlon Brando, Errol Flynn. And also there was this very kind of stereotypical view of the South Seas that was always portrayed in these films, you know, the beautiful women, the kind of maiden type, you know, beautiful flowing hair and sexually provocative, this kind of very quite misogynistic view of women that was portrayed through many of the films. But it's the favorite story of many an armchair dreamer. And what's interesting about it is, you know, even now I still get a lot of people writing to me and asking me about how they can possibly settle on Pitcairn Island, and is it as fantastic as what they imagine? And the answer is really no. It's an incredibly remote island. So that little marker there, if I was to zoom in, I would have to zoom in a very long way before you would even see that there was an island there. It's 2 miles by 1 mile, and it's literally halfway between New Zealand and Chile. And when we were on the boat, we never made it there. So it became this like dangling carrot at the end of, you know, like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And so this was my journey to get there from the UK via picking up some film in the US and then flying to Tahiti, and then from Tahiti to Mangareva, which is the outermost point in French Polynesia, and then catching a once weekly flight, between there and Tahiti twice to gather my stuff because the plane was so small, I couldn't take all of my equipment in one go. And then a ship for a few days, and then a ship ride on the way back, which was 21 days at sea. So it's very, very tiny. And if you look very carefully at this slide, you can see some of the distances. London, United Kingdom, 9,209 miles away. So these are kind of marked around the edges. And you can see the scale is very, very small. And this part here, it just shows that it is pretty much a completely vertical drop. It's not the archetypal Polynesian island that you would expect. And of course, there's this element of it too, which is that it has a very small population, which is dwindling. And this was another reason that attracted me to the island and to make a project about it, partly because I knew that in a few years' time, maybe this island would not exist anymore, or not in the way that we know it. So the top level here, this is a family tree of the whole island. And these people here at the top, the brown markers, those are the original mutineers. And then right down here, this is kind of where we are at the present and who is living on the island at the moment. And the blue squares, they are the only new blood introduced on the island since the very beginning of the settlement. So it's a very, very intertwined community. And now there are fewer than 50 people that live there on this very small lump of volcanic rock, which is incredibly isolated from the outside world. And you can only get there on a quarterly supply ship. And so just before I went to Pitcairn, this was one of my favorite things that was in the press at the time, Mars or Pitcairn, which would be the worst to live on. Pitcairn won out over Mars, but only very, very, very by a very tiny margin. And that was only because, at least on Pitcairn, there's a chance you might be able to come back, whereas with Mars, maybe not so much. You see, we would rather move to Pitcairn and wait until Mars has better transport links. And that brings me to one of the reasons why it might not be such a fantastic place to live. And so in 2004, a series of sexual abuse trials kind of hit the press. And there were 8 island men who were convicted of abusing girls, some of them as young as 8 years old. And when I was on the island, still 5 of those men were living there. And they'd served all of their sentences, but they were free to go about their business. And one of them was even the mayor of the island. And so the title of the project, which I should touch on, is Big Fence. And the reason for that is because Big Fence was the house that I was living in for most of the time on the island. And Big Fence is owned by this guy, who is called Steve Christian. And Steve Christian, at the time of the trials, was the mayor of the island. And he was convicted of multiple rapes. And at the time, he was he's in denial about it. He was pretending that there was no cause for concern. But he is the de facto leader of Pitcairn Island. He is the most closely related to Fletcher Christian that is living on the island. And Fletcher Christian, being the leader of the mutineers, is kind of the cause of the whole community. So anyone that is related to him automatically is almost like king of the island. So it's a kind of an aristocracy disguised as a democracy. And so the project, in order to really understand the island, it needed to not just be my pictures, because it's very hard to photograph something that has happened in the past. So the way to photograph and record the kind of the island that I experienced, it wasn't a straightforward process. So I had to make use of a lot of the archive to be able to tell the story of how did that abuse happen? How did we, as the Brits who are in charge of this island, it's our last remaining overseas territory, how did we allow that to happen? How does a small community kind of protect its own and prevent the women from being able to come forward? So this here was a presentation that I made at the Photographers Gallery in London. And you can see it contains a lot of things. There's a massive wallpaper behind it, which contains a lot of archive. But There are objects that islanders made. There are audio and interviews which talked about loneliness. There are found photos. You know, it's quite installation based. And so when I've been thinking about, you know, making project, you know, showing this work, it's always been very important that it's been quite mixed media. And so I always say, like, feel free to screenshot this because it's a little bit of a long blurb, and sometimes, you know, you don't have time to go through it all at the time. But if you ever want to come back to it or read it later, just take a screenshot and feel free to read. But basically, it covers off pretty much what I have just talked about, but also that I spent 3 months on the island, and there was no way on or off while I was there. And my time, it was incredibly difficult. I found myself being called the only woman of breeding age, and was the subject of much male attention that was unwelcome, and there was really nothing I could do about it. And of course, that gave me a particular insight into the islanders and the way that these problems had come about and why the women perhaps had not reported it. And of course, that relates to the interconnectedness of the island and the fact that every single person on that island is related to one another and is reliant on one another. So this is Big Fence, and it's the first house that you meet when you come up the main road on Pitcairn Island, and it's huge. And so it's called Big Fence for a reason. It's very large. And the area was called Fence, which was an original kind of property boundary. And so there are lots of kind of old island names, and this one is Big Fence because it's the biggest of the boundaries. And also I like the title because the title also relates to this idea of the biggest fence of them all, which is the Pacific, which kind of shrouds this place in mystery. And it keeps outsiders out and it keeps the islanders in, and it is the biggest, you know, prison wall that you could possibly imagine. So it's a very interesting idea about imprisonment and punishment, and how did these men that were convicted, how did they actually end up being held accountable for their crimes? And for the most part, they received incredibly lenient sentences, but that was in no small part due to the fact that their isolation meant that they were already living in a prison. So this is the island and a few aerial views of it. And you can see the island is quite a harsh environment. It's not what you would stereotypically think of as this Polynesian paradise. There are no beaches. The island is rugged. It's littered with place names like where Tom off, where Minnie fall. It's covered in places that are kind of synonymous with tragedy. And of course, when you're trying to photograph something that's happened in the past and the legacy of it, sometimes the best way to do that is actually through things like archive and found photographs. So I found in amongst, you know, in the dump where I would go digging around, I found photographs like this. This was actually stuck on the back of another picture. So when one picture had been stuck together, it had taken the image away. And this was originally backwards and I reversed it. And this is a kind of found photograph from that. And, you know, the hard part about this project and the thing that everyone comes back to all the time is it feels so claustrophobic. You know, there are so few pictures of the island itself. And there's a very good reason for that. Because when you're on this island, you're either on it or you're in the sea. There's no real way of photographing it because there aren't really very many viewpoints. So the pictures that you see repeated again and again and again in any kind of press about Pitcairn Island or any archive is always kind of taken from the same views. So this one on the right is an article that I actually found also just discarded on the island because the islanders are very obsessed with their own legacy and their own fame. And so there is a lot of kind of framed imagery about the island and articles that contain the islanders' names, which all kind of adds to this sense of complete and utter claustrophobia. And this picture is sort of, you know, it's the first one I've put in that's a Polaroid. And the Polaroid is a format that I have always embraced, but the main reason for it is that when I was a kid and we were sailing on the boat, we didn't have any money and we didn't spend a lot of time taking pictures. So we had no photographic evidence of my childhood and my growing up. Those pictures that I shared with you are the only ones that I have. And that's quite abstract when you're doing something extraordinary every day and you have no photographic evidence. And so when I was little, I used to collect things instead of pictures. So I would collect vials of sand or water or shells or beer mats with someone's like remnants of their drink. And I would write on it the time and the date and the person. And when I moved to the UK, I did work experience at a TV company, and we used to use Polaroid as for continuity. And one of the directors would give me free Polaroid film all the time. And so I fell in love with the Polaroid film because it was very similar to that. It was like an object that was developed in situ at that place and in that time, and you could never fake it. It could only be influenced by that particular environment that it was shot, whether it was hot or cold or you held it too tightly. And so this picture is an expired SX70 photograph, and I had wanted to use all of my remaining stocks of Polaroid film on a project that was meaningful to me, and Pitcairn Island seemed that it was kind of the reason why I became a photographer, was because of this lack of imagery. So I always put this one in kind of close to the beginning for that reason. But this is Christian's Cave, which is where Fletcher Christian, leader of the mutineers, used to go up into this cave, and he would watch over the community, and he would survey the scene and probably feel very depressed about the life that he had created for them all. And so the community is incredibly tiny, and there are obviously many issues with the tiny community, and one of them is, you know, there's no new blood, which is why I was targeted in the way that I was. But also, you can see from this image, this is an archive image, and I often use this when I'm teaching workshops about working with archive, about why archive can sometimes be very interesting. And this picture is really telling, because this is a picture of the Pitcairn school class at the time, and this was in the 70s. And what's interesting is the number of boys to the number of girls. And that helps to explain in some way why this kind of violence towards women erupted, because there was a huge imbalance. And these are the colors that, you know, we're using for the book. So I'm sure Greg will come back to this later. And so Polaroid also has this kind of funny characteristic where it makes everything look nostalgic and very beautiful. And I love that, because you can sometimes hide deep darkness within a Polaroid. And so a Polaroid like this, for instance, it looks like this kind of beautiful tangled web of texture, and you're not really quite sure what it is. But I love that with images like this, when you have the caption, you can explain exactly what this is. And this is the site of where Steve Christian, my island host, and that man I showed you early on, this is where the site of one of his rapes. And on the left-hand side, you can see an excerpt of the archive, which was from the original Privy Council appeal, when they tried to appeal their convictions, claiming that they didn't know that they were under British law. And on the right-hand side, this is a poem that's actually by Steve's sister-in-law when she was in school, talking about the banyan trees and how sinister they were, which is something that really comes out of this. And again, you know, I use Polaroid a lot of times to strip away this sense of time, or I use it to allow someone the space to really get into the moment of being photographed. And sometimes with difficult subjects, it's really helped. So on the right-hand side, you've got Sean Christian, and on the left-hand side, you have Randy Christian, and those two men are Steve's sons. And in the center is a girl that I use as kind of, she's a stand-in for every girl that was victimized, that lost their identity, that had to stay quiet. And so that girl is kind of the, I suppose, the linchpin of the story in a way, is this idea of these women that can't be photographed and can't be portrayed and they can't be named, but they are kind of the whole reason why this project exists. And on the right-hand side, so that picture, it took me almost 3 months to get that photograph. And I took a handful of pictures of him, but he was incredibly hard to tie down and persuade to be a part of this project. Largely because islanders, even though they are trying to advertise for people to move to the island and trying to change their image in the wider world, they are also incredibly paranoid about the press. And these two men were convicted of gang raping a girl similar age to the girl portrayed in the middle. And they took turns raping her by putting a t-shirt in her mouth. And they were convicted for several years. So this on the right-hand side is their mother. This is Steve's wife. And on the left-hand side, you can see a piece of archive that again comes from the Privy Council documents. And you can see there, the Queen versus Stevens Raymond Christian, that is her husband. The Queen versus Len Calvin Davis Brown, that is her brother. The Queen versus Len Carlisle Brown, that is her father. The Queen versus Dennis Ray Christian, her cousin. The bottom one, the Queen versus Randall K. Christian, is her son. So Olive, even though sometimes the women are not necessarily portrayed in the most obvious way in this project, they are kind of the thing that holds it all together and are often the hardest hit, even though perhaps they are not the victims that we assume. They are also the victims of being imprisoned in a society that they perhaps don't want to be a part of. And this image is from the house, Big Fence. And again, it echoes these like pinks and blues, which recur again and again and again in this project. You know, this very highly gendered color scheme. And this is Steve and Olive Christian's daughter's room. And the picture on the wall is a very, very famous picture in the UK. It was the biggest selling poster of the 80s. And it was photographed by a guy called Spencer Rowell. And it was in every little girl's room, and it was kind of meant to be this hint towards this very highly sensitive man, this modern man. And Tanya left the island around the same time as the trials kind of really broke loose, and all three of her brothers were they were implicated in the trials, and two were convicted. And she hasn't returned back to that bedroom, so it's literally left as it was when she left. But these kind of pictures have this kind of sense of foreboding about the island. This is Steve Christian's sister. She was the island police officer at the time, and she actually had to arrest her own brother. And on the left-hand side, you can see her being portrayed as the typical Polynesian beauty in a very old copy of National Geographic. So these islanders have always been kind of, I suppose, looked up to as this kind of Polynesian paradise, but the reality has always been hidden just below the surface. And this image is often the one you see from this project. This is Kushana Warren Pugh, and she was the only child living on Pitcairn Island when I was there. So she was, you know, very curious about me, and we had quite a good relationship. But underneath her is a little excerpt from a piece of paper that I had to sign when I arrived on the island. And this was the Child Wellbeing Charter. And the Child Wellbeing Charter basically said that if you were visiting the island or living on the island, you couldn't associate with any child unless you were on the safe adult list that her parents had prepared. So it was a very kind of worrying piece of paper for some people that landed on the island, some boats that stopped when they were crossing the Pacific, and it caused them to get back on their boat and leave again without coming ashore. And I often find that the island itself, it was very hard to photograph, and I wanted to give people a sense of the geography of the space, but it was hard to get that perspective. So again, I used to come back to this idea of the rock a lot, and the volcanic rock and the harshness of the island's own environment really echoed the callous nature of the personalities that were held in the island, and also the divided community that was really fractured by the time that I was there, between the people that thought that they had done nothing wrong and that they were being dragged down by what had happened in the recent history. And there was a huge, you know, division between these kind of two groups of innocent and guilty. And of course, like many island communities in the Pacific and in many places in Africa, it was a place that had been targeted by the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And the Seventh-day Adventist Church really took Pitcairn on as a pet project, and they thought that it was kind of heaven on earth and one of the most pious communities. So when the men were convicted and were jailed, you know, many of the islanders were contacting the Seventh-day Adventist Church off island, and they were asking for guidance and advice. And so on the right-hand side here, you see this letter that was basically encouraging this island person to visit the men in prison, to read them religious texts. And when you look at the rest of the archive, you can find that, you know, the Seventh-day Adventist Church really kind of believed that this was a big scapegoat program by the British government, and you know, that actually that this was all a load of rubbish. So there are some images, you know, that I love in this project, and that it was really hard to get in, because they have a lot of meaning and almost no meaning all at once. And sometimes it's my favorite pictures that are like that. And sometimes you have to kill your babies. So sometimes this one actually gets cold, but I'm showing it today. So this is Irma Christian, and I put this in because Irma was the oldest woman on Pitcairn Island when I was there. And she's peeling wild beans, and wild beans are a Pitcairn staple food that no one really likes, but everyone eats. And her hands, I love the way her hands just look like the beans that she's peeling. But it was interesting because on her last birthday while I was there, which was her last birthday on Earth, in fact, she gave this speech, and it was really interesting because I'd had a really horrible time on the island, and I'd been treated very badly, and I'd had to go to the police and file reports myself, and it was quite unpleasant. But she gave this rousing speech about how we needed, as a community, to always be more welcoming to outsiders, which is what Pitcairners call everyone else. And she kind of, you know, she made it sort of seem like it was aimed at me in some way, because it was only a couple of days before when I'd taken this picture, and she'd asked about my time on the island and how I'd found the people and what we could possibly do to make sure that Pitcairn Island could survive. And it's an interesting one because, you know, now with this project, I've become part of the island's history in a way, and part of its present. And people are constantly asking me about Pitcairn Island, and maybe perhaps people that maybe would move to Pitcairn Island are now asking me for advice on how they would do it, or if it was a good idea. And so now, whether the islanders like it or not, I'm forever part of this, of their future too. And so I put that in for that reason. And you know, some of the people on the island, you know, they don't necessarily agree that the trials were not just a ploy by the British government to depopulate the island, which is not what I believe, and not what most of the victims would have you think. But I thought it was interesting that that is the perspective that some people have. And this particular man here, he was actually moving back to Pitcairn Island after many years in the Air Force in New Zealand. And on the left-hand side, we have this piece of archive that I put next to him, which is the Pitcairn Island hymn. And it actually refers to the bounty and the bounty history, but the words ring true given the current context. We own the depths of sin and shame, of guilt and crime from which we came. Thy hand upheld us from despair, else we had sunk in darkness there. And I feel like those words are very resonant with the island as it is. And just, I've got a couple more, but so on the left-hand side, you know, this image, it's very hard with this project where it's very dark. Sometimes you have to have moments of lightness. And this picture, I put in whenever I do a show, and everyone goes, "Oh, that's so beautiful. I love that picture." And I say, "Yeah, good. I'm glad you like it." But what that picture actually is the guy on the previous slide, he was moving back to Pitcairn and he needed to take over a house. And on Pitcairn Island, you don't go and build a house because it's very difficult to get building materials. You tend to move into one that was already there. And the house that was empty was a distant cousin, who was called Brian Young, who you can kind of see here on the right-hand side. And Brian Young was convicted of raping girls as young as 8. And he had what the harshest sentence of anyone on Pitcairn Island. And his house was left empty because he got gangrene in his toe, and he was allowed under medical dispensation to leave the island. And he left various things in his house, including, you know, documents relating to the trial and newspaper clippings, etc., etc. And that picture on the left is actually when Kevin, the guy in the previous slide, was burning all of those remaining belongings of Brian. And that smoke hanging in the palm tree is what's outside of the house. And I put that next to this piece of archive with Brian Young foreground, Dave Brown, and a clutch of island kids stretch out in the shade for a picnic and a corn bake. And it sounds so innocent. But of course, now given the power of hindsight, we realize the resonance of these, you know, these languid days hanging out with children, that there was this darker subtext. And I'll just flick through a couple more. This is my favorite person on the island. That's his partner who came over to guard the men. She was a New Zealand prison warden. And then back to some of the Polaroids, which sometimes I use to kind of create this dreamlike idea of the island, because, you know, through the archive, we get the sense of it being this dark place. From the factual kind of more documentary images, we get the idea of what it's like now. And the Polaroid captures that thing that people believe in, this island that is not real, this island that doesn't exist, the island that everyone thinks of from far away. So this is the gap between the fact and the fiction. This is the fiction that we like to buy into versus the fact that we're presented with. And then this image, you know, because this one has been used quite often. This one is Kushana, the only child, and she's feeding the frigate birds. And I like this image because actually I discredited it in the beginning. And sometimes, you know what I said about killing your baby, sometimes you have to go through past old edits and realize that maybe there are gems that you'd ignored. And actually this picture hadn't made it into any of my edits for a very long time. I just used to skip past it. And then one day it kind of resonated with me when I was reading again, like the swallows and the Amazons, and this idea between, I suppose, like the link between man and nature that is intrinsic in this project. And just to skip past like a few more archive bits, but you know, I did know about the history of the island. I was not going there believing in it in this very dreamy fashion. I knew that it was a harsh and horrible place. And this telegram, I think, really sums it up, because this was this is H.E. Maud, who was stationed on the island for a long time from the British kind of the colonial office at the time, later the Foreign Office. And he was there with his wife and Lady Maud, who was a kind of aristocratic daughter, and his son Alaric. And he was trying to get off the island and go to his next station, and he was finding it really difficult. And he was trying to hitch a ride to cross the Pacific. And at that time, you would have to just hitch a ride on a cargo ship. And so they would send a telegram. And this is just interesting because, you know, he was talking about this other ship, and he said, the captain appears opposed to taking women and children on New Zealand run at present, and no woman can be left alone on this island without a protector. It's little better than a madhouse. And this was in 1939. So the British government knew that there were problems, because this is a British government official. And this is a British government official trying to send a message back to the British government to say that there are problems on this island in a very coded way. And we did nothing about it from 1939 onwards. So who is to blame for the problems on Pitcairn Island? Is it us or is it them? And then this is what the island looks like from the sea. This is taken from a very dirty porthole in the ship as I was leaving, and I was feeling very emotional about it, mostly because I felt that I'd survived something that I thought at some point that maybe I wouldn't, and I would have another drop named after me on the map where Rhiannon fall. And I was delighted that that had not happened. So, and then I'll leave you with a nice one, which is one of the better parts about a remote island, is that it sometimes has very beautiful stars. And it became a dark skies territory after I left. And apart from Lonely Planet using this image a lot without my permission, this was my favorite part about being on a remote island, is looking up and seeing a sky that is so unfamiliar to someone who lives in London. So, and if you ever want to get in touch with me and know more about the project or what I'm up to, then feel free. And that's me, very small, in a pub, which seems to be my ongoing theme of life. Boats being bought in pubs, my name coming from a pub. There I am, my first Polaroid in a pub. It seems that they're about to follow me around. It's the Irish, obviously. So thank you very much. And yeah, if you want to know anything, obviously jump in the Q&A later on. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Rhiannon. That was fascinating. Wow, it was really great. Because I must say that I've seen your project, of course, a lot of times and talked about it a lot of times as part of the festival. And I've seen here some new, I wouldn't say only photographs, I would say images, because just now I got to the understanding that they are collages and not just photos. So yes, thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. And I kind of don't understand, why did you do this to yourself and go to this terrible place? But I do understand also why. So very courageous of you. And thank you. I want to introduce now Grzegorz Kosmala, founder and director of Blow Up Press in Warsaw. He is also editor-in-chief of Doc Photo magazine, publisher of photo books, originator of Debuts, a platform promoting emerging photographers. He serves as a juror in international photo contests, including the Meitar Award, Siena International Photography Award, Goma Photography Grant, Urban Photo Awards, and a Poznan Photo Diploma. He graduated from the Media Management and International Relations and Diplomacy faculties at the Nowy Sącz School of Business in Poland. So, Grzegorz, please tell us a bit about Lowell Press and your work there. And we'll start with a small, short presentation, and then we'll move more to a talk. I have a few questions for you and eager to hear you. So please.
So, hello everybody. Very nice to see you. Let me start my presentation with, sorry. Yeah. Okay, Ron, I think it would be better if you would start my presentation from your computer because I'm quite new with Zoom. Okay, so I will stop sharing. And if you could start the presentation from your computer, I would be very much appreciate this. So Blow Up Press, as you may presume, its name is taken from Michelangelo Antonioni film, Blow Up. And we started in 2012 in July. So this year we will have nine birthday, 9th anniversary of our existence. At the beginning, we started as a typical online publisher with our dog photo magazine, which was free PDF-based document to download each month from our website. Later, it was joined by ContraDoc quarterly, also in a PDF file version that was focused on each kind of photography, but documentary one, because Dog Photo Magazine was concentrated on documentary only. 2 years later, we published our first book. It was a group publication called Debuts, as you mentioned already, and we promoted the most talented emerging photographers. In the first 4 editions of this project, we promoted only Polish photographers. The 5th one, and also last one, was already international. From the really beginning, our readers asked us about paper-based version of the magazine. And you must know that we always play against the market. So we decided to follow our readers and switch from online to paper. That was quite a strange move. But we are very, very grateful to them that they proposed us to follow this direction. So in 2015, we did some test print of our magazine to see how the market would welcome such publication. And in 2016, we switched entirely with all our projects, I mean, debuts and the magazines to paper. The first monograph was published 1 year later in 2017 in November, and it was a great success. It was a book by Agata Grzybowska, a very famous Polish photojournalist, about people who decided to switch to live in a very remote area of Poland called Bieszczady Mountains. And then, if you could switch to the next slide, Ron, please. In 2020, we launched BUP Book Award contest, which replaced debuts. And this contest is focused on projects, and the main prize in this competition is to publish a book. So we welcome submissions. that are not book dummies, because we never work with dummies in our practice. So we welcome photography-based projects and one of them chosen by firstly international jury and then directed by Blow Up Press publishers. We published one book, and recently we published the first book, the winner of the 2020 BUP Book Award, which is Erna Helena Ania by Tomasz Łączny. And after so many years of existence, we have 8 monographs published, 5 debuts book published, and 47th issues of Dog Photo magazine, which are already on the market. And always in all our publications and all our monographs, or in all projects that are featured in Dog Photo magazine, we try to follow our motto, which is on the next slide. If you could, yeah, which is when the story matters. And so with this with this motto, I couldn't imagine that we could award another project than Rhiannon projects in the last year edition of Meitar Photography Award. So congratulations again, Rhiannon, for this project. In all our presentation, in our publications, we show relations between people and environment, and you can see it on the next slide. So we like projects that are on one hand personal but also universal, as Rhiannon's project, because there's a lot of Rhiannon's experience on the island in this project. And if we could switch to another slide, please. Yes, we like the projects that on one hand are original, present new approach to topics, but first of all, they are thoughts-provoking. And I'm not using any pictures in our presentation because if you want to see what I just said in practice, I encourage you to visit our website, which is visible on the next slide, blowuppress.eu. So feel free to visit our website to see all the magazines we published, all the books we published, including debuts, publications. And shortly about Blow Up Press, it would be, I think, all, except one thing. All publications that we have published so far are designed by one person, by Aneta Kowalczyk, and she will also design Rhiannon books. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you. Actually, I would want to ask you about the switch to paper from digital, which is a very interesting decision in this time. But before of that, and before getting to Rhiannon's book, I do want to ask you, as someone who is very familiar with the photography book industry and everything that is going around Europe. I know that you just came from Italy from a festival. So I know that the photography books festivals and fairs are getting more and more popular, and especially in the past few years, which is kind of maybe strange in such a digital world we are having. And I wanted to ask you, how do you explain this phenomenon of photography books being so popular?
I think it is quite natural development of photography, because right now we can observe that photography is leaving newspapers and is looking for new spaces to appear. And there are just two possibilities. One of them is gallery, and the second one is photo book. And for example, in Poland, we have lots of publications that are self-published by photographers because they are just looking for the way to show their work. And I think that photo books are also a natural conclusion of any or majority of photography-based projects, because it is something that stays with us. Exhibitions are temporal, and the book is something that you have for years. And it is also why I think that the online editions of book fairs are not so prosperous right now, because you really need to touch the book and to go through the pages and to talk with the publisher or the author who is sitting in front of you and signing the book. Actually, it was the same with Rhiannon. I think we met in Amsterdam. We didn't know each other back then, and she was impressed by one of our books, and yeah, it sounds like dreams comes true, that we will collaborate together on the next one.
Yeah, I bought 2 of them, I remember. Yeah. I'm a big photo book fan.
That's so nice. I didn't know you know from before. Great. And I must say that from a curatorial point of view, I totally understand the idea of the fact that the photo book or the catalog, for instance, stays forever in a way that an exhibition doesn't. So it is, of course, something that you can hold and embrace. And I do understand, maybe in this time when everything's is more and more digital, we want to feel something in our hands and touch them and take them with us to some remote island, maybe someplace without a battery. And I'm sure that there are a lot of photographers maybe in the audience right now, and maybe out there at all, that would love to take a project of theirs and make it a photo book. So I wanted to ask you if you have some kind of a recommendation for a model of work. If, for instance, I'm a photographer who wants to publish my project as a photo book.
First of all, be honest in your photography, and be honest with your approach to the project, to the topic that you want to ask to encourage a bit. Because sooner or later we will discover that there is something wrong between the photographer and the project. So that is one of the most important things. In terms of blow-up press, do not submit dummy. We treat all our publications as our child, as our children. So we like to design the books from the scratch, to know the details of the project, to investigate everything as much as possible, to know the project the same way as the photographer does. And do not provide us with PDF, but with images solemnly, so we could already see how we can work with them. But yeah, be honest, and yeah, and prepare for a very, very, very long way to wait as the book will be published, because Blow Up Press is just 2 persons company. And so we work very, very slowly, but we always publish what we promise to publish. So
looking forward to November to see.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Definitely. And I know I want to be like a bit practical, and maybe you'll have some question that could help some of the people here. And in case that you don't win the Meitar Award, do you have any recommendations or idea of how to manage to raise a budget in order to have a photo book? Like, is there any tips regarding that?
No tips, because we quite often receive the question, how much does it cost to publish a book? And the proper answer could be $100 as well as $1 million. So everything depends on the project, and everything depends on how structured the project is, how structured the book will be. It depends on the paper that would be used, and sophisticated changes in the papers, a mix of papers, the book size, the final print run. So everything has to be calculated, and then we could answer the question, how much does it cost? So yeah, it is the only answer I can give you right now.
Okay, so from this one, I do want to get to PITCAIRN Island, to Big Fence Project, and to ask you both about your working process and about different decisions. Maybe you can like share some details.
We start?
Yeah, well, I don't know. Pick a coin, flip a coin. You want to go? Or?
Yeah, we are currently on the very important phase, which is discussions and what should be included finally in the book. And because as you saw in the Rhiannon presentation, she did something absolutely extraordinary. I mean, she has collected everything what one could find about Pitcairn, and she has photographed everything what was possible on the island, and so it is extremely complex catalog of documents, photographs, archives. So we have to be very we have to decide which documents are absolutely necessary to be in the book. Not to make readers bored with the subject, because subject is too important for such thing, and we have just one move. So
yeah, and I'm always of the you know, when I was thinking about this as a book project from the very beginning, I always wanted the book to mirror the experience of being on the island. And that's a very hard thing to do, but the project was not linear. You know, some projects are very straightforward. You go somewhere, you have an idea, you photograph, you know, X, Y, Z. That's the project. You've almost planned it before you go, and that's the end. And this is an interesting project because it's obviously a living place. It's not a finished chapter, like it's still alive, it's still living. I have now weirdly become part of it. So when you're, you know, I said earlier, like when you make a project that has a lot of archive in it, now if you search for archive about Pitcairn Island, you'll find me part of the archive. So it's this sort of strange idea of like becoming part of the project. So it isn't just you know, like showing just work, it's also like contextualizing my experience of being there. And so the book is like non-linear in a sense, because, you know, each part springs off in multiple ways. There isn't just one way of reading it. And the experience of being on the island, it was very confusing. You learn a piece of information from one person, and then you learn a piece of information from another person. Then you piece it together, and, you know, 6 months later, the connections arise. And, you know, so the book has to feel like that world where it's almost a bit overwhelming and a little bit confusing and a little bit hard to know that you have the sense of darkness that's there, but you're not quite sure exactly who and what and who did what to who, but you just know that there's something off. And so when we've been talking about, like, you know, constructing it, we've been talking about those things, but how to make that experience part of the reader's experience. Because in my own opinion, and this is what I love about photo books, is I love a book that shows me something that is different than what I could see in an exhibition, or it's different than what I can see in a photographer's website. Like, why am I holding a book of the project and not visiting a show or going to a talk? Like, what is it about the book format that allows you to have this completely different experience? And of course, you know, when we're talking about like a living island, it's difficult too, because a book is finite. You know, a book is one thing and it's a period in time, but you have to have the suggestion somehow that this is, you know, like a beginning of a discussion, not the end of it.
So. Yeah, exactly. And we also have to face one thing that with this book, we will completely damage the image of Pitcairn Island as a paradise place.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, Wikipedia has done a pretty good job of that too, and BBC News. But yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, you know, I said before, like, just I receive a lot of messages from people imagining this like perfect place, and it isn't that. But you have to have like a hint of that. So it's almost getting that balance. It's like showing what the outside world has projected onto this island for the longest time, of this Polynesian paradise, this holy grail, this place where you get free land and freedom and make your own rules. And then the reality of it, which is that with that freedom, you know, with freedom comes great responsibility, as we all know. And sometimes when you abuse that freedom, you can end up in very dark places. And this project kind of, yeah, it's there to kind of illustrate that. Be careful what you wish for, I think.
Yes.
Motto for anything about distance. Very much be careful what you wish for. So
yeah.
Wow. I must say that one thing that popped during your talk is that you mentioned the fact that there's a lot of, it was kind of obvious for you regarding the color scheme of the book and the project itself. And now when you were talking about the fact that the exhibition of it should be different from holding a book, I think this is one of the points, because for instance, when I was looking at your submitted works for the Meitar Award, I couldn't have tell that the blues and the pinks were so dominant in the project. And so I think maybe this is like one of the points where the book would say something that this exhibition haven't. So
yeah, I think for sure. I think sometimes, I mean, you know, when I showed it in the photography gallery, we used the pink in the background. And obviously, you know, blue and pink has a very particularly gendered, you know, connotation, which I think is kind of important. But also it's interesting that, you know, that it used to be that blue was the color for girls and pink was the color for boys. Like that swapped around like the middle of the century. So you know, even color associations are something fluid. So, you know, maybe if someone is looking at this book in like, you know, 50 years time, maybe it'll swap back and we won't have that association anymore. And maybe it'll be pink is for boys again. And maybe it won't matter. So yeah, it's interesting that these things, sometimes when you're preparing things for like submission, you know, you have to be quite brutal. And you cut things out that maybe are a more beautiful image, but you put something else in for meaning. And I think, you know, this project, it's evolved definitely through the submission process. So I always tell every photographer that, you know, ever ask me about, you know, how do you launch projects? I'm always like, submit to things, because actually it doesn't matter about the winning. It's also about the process of like editing, so you know your own ideas. And I think, you know, the more I was looking at, you know, the stereotypical colors of like an island, you know, the greens, the blues, you know, that kind of more earthy tones, it became more obvious that the color scheme needed to be something that was much more related to this particular island. And this idea of, you know, gender and power and, you know, this almost innocence that we portray of the island from afar that is completely at odds with the reality, you know, that childlike color scheme. I think, you know, it became kind of more important as I was like doing all of these submissions and starting to think about exhibiting it. But yeah, in the book, you can make that so much more concrete.
Great. Thank you for this tip regarding submission. And I would want to use this stage in order maybe to ask if we have some other submission tips to give here the crowd, the audience.
I mean, yeah, my submission tip is that, yeah, you don't enter something with the idea of winning, but you enter it with sometimes the idea of getting your work in front of judges that you respect. So I always look at like a judging list, and if those judges are in line with kind of what you do, then maybe not an opportunity where you might win it right now, but there will be a conversation at some point that you can have, and they will remember you if the work is good. And so often for things that I have not won, I have met often with the people who have seen my work in judging rounds and we've had other productive conversations and it's ended up somewhere else. So that would be my tip. And also just keep on editing it down to the point where you can tell the bare bones of the story with like enough beauty and enough intrigue. So a good balance between the two things, you know, something visually nice and then also something that is a little bit intriguing, because you know, I do these days quite a lot of teaching, and it's interesting when you have students that show you these bodies of work and they're like really huge, or sometimes they're so tight that you can't, there's nowhere for you to go with it. Like those two extremes are often really difficult to give any feedback on, because you're just like, on one hand you're overwhelmed and you don't know what to say, and on the other hand you're like, well, I don't know how this could, where to take it, because you're not giving me enough information. So I think that's something you get from doing it a lot.
Great. Thank you. Those are great tips. I think at this stage you'll see if we'll have some questions from the audience. I see if there's here. No, actually, there's a lot of comments here, but none of them are related questions. Okay, so maybe we can open. You can open your audio, so unmute yourself if you have a question. I think that would be the time for it.
Also use the fundraising hand feature, which I love.
Oh, that's great. I'm not familiar with this feature, but yeah, you can raise your hand also.
Silence prevails.
Okay, so if there's not any questions from the crowd, so I would want to
Hi, Lisa.
say.
There is one. Lisa's put her hand up.
Hi.
Oh,
Yeah. Hi.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm
Please
actually
do.
wondering, I've been thinking, since you showed the female police officer from the island, I was wondering if you talked to her more about how she decided to get into that. And I just thought it was interesting that she's a female.
So a lot of the jobs on Pitcairn are split quite equally amongst the sexes, simply because there are so few people that you use whoever you have around and who is willing. The police officer is not a job that many people really want to do, so it's often left to the people that don't have the biggest status in other areas. So they're not like the project manager, or they're not the mayor. And Brenda is from kind of the first family of Pitcairn, so she's you know, the Pitcairn Island kind of aristocracy. She's the sister of Steve. And she'd actually lived off of Ireland for a long time. She lived in England. She was married to a radio operator who visited Pitcairn Island, and then they moved back to the UK. And so she has kids here. And then they split up, and she went back to Pitcairn to give birth to her son, who was the first male born on Pitcairn Island for like 27 years. So you know, she's an interesting character because she has quite a good sense of like the outside world anyway, and she has quite an intense sense of justice. She was running the Navy shop, so it's like on a military base. So she was working in the UK, not on a military base. But you know, the community police officer is a bit of a Mickey Mouse profession in a way. So they don't really have any sway. They are basically there to kind of keep the peace amongst a large family. And their other job is basically to stamp your passport if you arrive on a boat from the middle of the ocean unannounced, or if you're going on and off a cruise ship that is passing on its way to Easter Island, they kind of file the paperwork. That's kind of their main job. And it was only really with the trials that happened, it was the first time that really crime had come onto Pitcairn Island. There was one murder trial a very, 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 very long time ago, like hundreds of years. But apart from that, there had really been no crime on Pitcairn Island, although, as we've now learned, there was plenty of crime. It was just never really reported. And so Brenda always found herself in a very easy position because she didn't really have to do a lot until all of a sudden she found herself in the unenviable position of having to arrest her brother. So now her role has expanded a little bit, but she gets to do things as the island police officer, like take the little girl out on kayaking trips, or she ferries her to and from the island school. So it's much more of a pastoral role. And since the trials have happened, there's actually an off-island police officer that is funded by the British government and recruited from New Zealand that lives on the island on 2-year rotations, so that they don't get too attached to the community. And that community police officer role is much more like a conduit, a way for that off-island police officer to translate their much more traditional views of policing into this very particular environment of Pitcairn. So I don't know if that answers a little bit.
Thank you, Rhiannon. I see that Zev Kosa has raised his hand, so please, Zev.
First of all, good evening, and thank you very, very much for both guests for your presentations and the information. That the project is astounding and very meaningful, and of course, the learning about blow-up press is also extremely interesting. Rhiannon, I wanted to speak to you actually on the issues of the submissions, more possibly on a technical scale. If I were to ask you, what was the shortest amount of time that you spent on preparing a submission, and what has been the longest time? Do you feel that there has to be some sort of minimal amount of time put into the process of assembling work, editing it, and then preparing it for a submission? Or is it something that can be done from today to tomorrow, or you need years or whatever? Yeah,
so that's a really good question, and it's one no one ever asks, but it's a really good question. So most people that I know seem to spend 2 hours doing a submission just before a deadline. And I try, and I'm very guilty of like finishing a submission just before a deadline, but I have, multiple Word documents where I've been like honing something or copying and pasting and changing things around. So sometimes, that process, I start it usually when I see the deadline, announced. And then I kind of keep going back and adding to something and changing it around, or like I work on a Mac, so I make a folder of the images and I drag them around visually until it kind of looks like I'm telling the story I want to tell. So I honestly think the more time you have, the better, just because then you have options, whereas often you push yourself into a corner when you do it in the last minute and you submit something you didn't really mean to submit, or it just wasn't your best foot forward. And what I've discovered more than anything is the most infuriating process of every submission that I've ever done is, as a person that writes very long captions, there's very little space usually when you submit. And so you write this caption and it works perfectly well for one submission. And you think, oh, I've got this in hand now. Next submission, really easy. I've written it all, got the images, totally fine. Then you go to find that the box doesn't fit your caption. And then it says 200 characters. And then when it's like 200 characters with spaces or 200 characters without spaces. So now I've learned that with every caption that I now have to have about 10 versions, one with like 10 words, one with 20 words, one with 50 words, one that's full length. And the same thing with image sizes. The thing that takes so long with submissions is also like resizing your images every single time, making sure that it's 2000 pixels and then 800 pixels and then 400 pixels. So, keep everything and don't throw it away, because otherwise you spend your life just repeating the same steps over and over and over. But, I normally would say that the minimum amount of time that I've ever kind of, spent on an application probably is about like a full day, if you put it in all in hours of sitting there. And that's probably the minimum, because it always takes much longer than what you think. But of course, it's a lot easier when you already have like a bio that you've written, and you already have like a shorter bio and a 200-word bio and a 100-word and a 50-word. It's much easier, but it's better always to have those things prepared, I think, because you know that you're going to be asked for them. So you might as well have those versions of your, bio and your project statement. Always have like a catchy 2-line version of your project statement, because that's often used. And also, if you ever submit anything for press, they love to have that kind of like bite-sized chunk. So yeah, having different versions and different lengths is really useful. And I would say like minimum amount of time is like probably about 8-9 hours, like solid, if you're preparing something from scratch.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, so someone else wants to ask, raise his hand, ask a question.
He's managed with the hand raising, but he's still got his hand up.
Rhiannon, those were great tips. Really, like good ones to keep. And I want to thank you very much. And thank you, Grzegorz. Yes, the recording will be available. We will screen it on our Facebook page and Photo Israel's Facebook page, and then you can go back to the great tips and to this amazing project and learning about how to have your own photo book, and also great tips from Greg regarding that. So thank you very much for a great evening. And I want to thank also the Meitar Family Fund for a long-term collaboration and trust. And I want to thank Ron Cohen from Photo Israel, who is with this evening on the technical side. It was great having you with us. I invite you all. I invite you all to go to Photo Israel website and photo Facebook page to register to future events and to submit your works to the Meitar Award, of course. So thank you very much and good evening. Bye.
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 Bye. Thank you so much.